Hey, it's Charlie the Wine again. For those of you coming on for the first time, you're going to have great fun as Oz, Kieron and I ramble around English wines. For those of you that have seen us before, we've been doing a series about English wines and the wonderful wines we have in this country. But today, we've chosen a specific vineyard to talk about. Nyetimber, Chillington, Sussex. And I've been joined again by my old wine trade friend, Clarke, who, by the way, you got a very good write-up in the Telegraph by your friend Victoria Moore. And yes. Oz has written the definitive book on English wine, and this is available in good shops, but also on our website, Forever Thirsty. So great for a stocking filler, absolutely wonderful. Learn more about English wines from this book, but of course you're going to learn more about English wines by listening to Oz. And also, you know, Oz, we're going to have to get rid of him. He's far too good looking, this guy.
I know.
Kieron Atkinson from the English Wine Project, whose knowledge of English wines is absolutely paramount. So in a few moments, we're going to be joined by our friends from Nyetimber. But in the meantime, we're going to have a glass of fizz. So we're going to start. I noticed you probably already got yours open, Oz. We're going to have a glass of the Nyetimber Classic Cuvée. So that's the label, Nyetimber. We're going to hear a lot more about that over the course of the next 45 minutes. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm opening mine.
We've actually prepped mine.
You've prepped yours, have you? I've prepped mine, Charlie, because he's so reliable when it comes to opening stuff. I mean, it's going to make an awful mess of your trousers again, Charlie. Show us how to do it.
Twist the bottle, not the neck.
If you remember, if you don't remember, it doesn't matter. Oh, well.
Thank you very much indeed. How's about that? Right, let's pour it.
Charlie, the new look is like looking at Michael Douglas in some sort of, I wouldn't know which film, but you've lost so much weight. It's incredible.
Exercise and drinking good wine. That's the answer. That's the key to everything. So,
which Michael Douglas are we talking about? Are we talking about Michael Douglas the actor or Michael Douglas the mud wrestler?
I was thinking Michael Douglas the actor, Gordon Gekko-esque, maybe in his retirement.
Well, you know, they'll be even less of me by Christmas time. So, okay,
here we are.
So we have the classic cuvee Nyetimber.
I think it might be worth, Charlie, just, oh, by the way, look at everybody. I'm old. I love flutes. I like drinking my sparkling wine out of
I know you do.
glasses. Yeah. They feel wonderful. I got this on my wedding day and I'm going to drink with it till I die. But also, I like the way that it accentuates the bubble. Charlie's doing what's the trendy thing at the moment, which is drinking a sparkling wine out of a good wine glass. It's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. Charlie will get more flavor from this wine than I will, but I'll get more of a buzz in my head than he will. So frankly, when you're drinking sparkling wine, often it's the buzz in your head you're after. But this Nyetimber, I think we should just have a moment of saying, why is Nyetimber important? Because there's in English wine, there's before Nyetimber and there's after Nyetimber. Before Nyetimber, no one had ever really tried to do anything world-breaking. Nobody ever thought they could, and people were extraordinarily grateful if they actually got any grapes into the winery at all to make wine. And in the 1990s, this was broken apart by a fabulous cussed couple from Chicago called Sandy and Stuart Moss, who came from Chicago to Sussex, determined to make great wine, not just any old wine, great wine. And when they found this beautiful, warm, south-facing, sandy slope in a place called Nyetimber, they said, that's where we're going to make our wine. And they got no help from the English. The Department of Agriculture came down and said, oh, you should plant apples. And this is their wine consultant from the Department of Agriculture said, plant apples. And as Stuart Moss said, I didn't come 4,000 miles to plant apples. So he said, I've come to make the greatest sparkling wine in the world. And from nowhere, using Chardonnay and Pinot Noir grapes, using the Champagne method, using the best equipment, using a fabulous winemaker from Champagne who had his own little family company. They made a wine who whose flavor, whose acidity was like a sort of rapier wrapped in silk, and whose creaminess was like a fresh croissant slurped and slathered with creme fraiche, and whose nuttiness was like hazelnuts or Kent cobs freshly roasted on the fire. Was it like champagne? Well, it wasn't really. It was completely different from champagne. And what that 1992 vintage, followed by a 1993 vintage, which, by the way, was voted best wine in the world, really? Not just England, best sparkling wine in the world. That just gave everybody a massive amount of confidence. And this now, what we're tasting here, is the latest example of what started with the 1993 vintage all those years ago.
So, what's the combination of grape percentage of grape in this one?
What's interesting, because this will be Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Yeah.
But when we talk to Cherie about the winemaking, we'll ask her whether she has Pinot Meunier in this as well.
It does say that on the back of the bottle, actually. Yeah.
She loves Pinot Meunier, and she thinks that without the Meunier there, you lose something in the heart of the wine. So I think that maybe that lovely soft savouriness in the middle of the wine is actually the Meunier coming through.
Well, I'm not throwing any of this away.
It's really interesting, actually. If you look at Nyetimber's style, they seem to be quite Chardonnay dominated. So I can't wait to talk to Brad and Cherie about their approach to winemaking and the Chardonnay, because so many people now are producing more and more Pinot Noirs and more Pinot Meuniers in style. So it's lovely to get these kind of rich, nutty flavors that you only really seem to get from Chardonnay.
Well, talking of Chardonnay, we're going to move on now to the Blanc de Blanc, which of course is 100% Chardonnay. So again, I'm going to illustrate my way of opening a bottle.
Now, this Blanc de Blanc, again, I think Cherie will tell us, but I'm pretty sure this is the first Blanc de Blanc that they made, which uses grapes not only from Sussex, which is on a lovely, warm, sandy soil, which, of course, in a northern area like England is terribly important, but this also uses grapes from Hampshire. And Hampshire is on pure chalky soil, and that chalky soil is regarded as the best soil to grow Chardonnay in the whole of Champagne, because Champagne comes from northern France, only a couple of hours drive from Calais, and the soils that come across from Champagne basically are exactly the same in Hampshire as they are in Champagne. So,
can you tell me the difference between chalk and greens? Is it green sand?
Green sand. Green sand, every geologist will tell you differently, but basically in the center of Sussex, there's a thing called the anticlines, and the green sand is often the soil which is underneath the chalk. So North Downs and South Downs, you've got a very thin topsoil, sometimes only 6 to 12 inches, maybe sometimes 2 or 3 feet, but it's sometimes as little as 6 to 12 inches in places like Hampshire. And underneath that, you've then got anywhere from 5 yards, 10 yards, feet, 30 feet, 50 feet, 100 feet of chalk. And under that, you've got this sandy soil, very free draining sandy soil. Now, North and South Downs, they haven't been washed away. The stuff in the middle of Kent and Sussex, the chalk's been washed away, and you've got these small hills like this, which have got the green sand, which was underneath the chalk and is now on the top. So it's a warmer soil. But it's a very much valued one in Champagne. There's only about 1% of Champagne or something is green sand, but it's much sought after by the big Champagne producers.
Well, let's try it. Oh, great nose, love that.
But this, I tasted all the wines for this when they were still wines. Cherie and I and Brad had a session in their vineyard down at the Tillington vineyard, just down near where they come from in Sussex. And we set the table up in the vineyard and went through all the still wines. And the difference between the Sussex wines and the Hampshire wines was quite remarkable.
Really?
So, of course, the difference becomes less obvious when you put the bubbles in it. But it'd be interesting to see how much, if any, Hampshire soil, Hampshire fruit Cherie put in this. I suspect she put in a bit because she just couldn't resist using it.
So again, it's down to the blending. The blending is terribly, terribly important.
Yes,
it is.
some producers just only have one vineyard.
Yeah.
And make wine from one vineyard. Even there, though, nowadays, you'll find that most good producers have got all their little parcels of the land all cut up into tiny little bits.
Sure.
You talk to good producers now. We were talking to Gusbourne, and Gusbourne have also got some chalky soil in Sussex, but most of their vineyard is in Kent. But it's divided up into 60, 70, 80, 90 bits. Every little bit is divided up, so that they think there's a bit more clay there. And I used a different rootstock, and I used a different clone. And it goes a bit to the east, and that goes a bit to the west, and that goes a bit to the south. All of these things will make a difference, particularly because we're in a marginal climate like southern England.
And in regards to style, what do you think of the styles? Because we've got a very traditional champagne blend, the Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier, and then a Blanc de Blanc of just pure Chardonnay. Do you think that's a good way for England to go, or do you think we should be thinking more kind of single vineyard, single grape styles?
I think we should do both because they're completely different flavors. Now, I find that this one is quite soft for a 2013 because 2013 was the latest vintage ever in England. It's one of those vintages that got off to a nice early spring, and then everything just slowed down. And it's I don't know what Wimbledon was like that year, but I suspect Wimbledon, everyone was wearing sweaters at Wimbledon. It was so cold. The flowering, when it finally happened, was very late. And that means that everything is going to be late, unless you have a really hot summer. We didn't have a really hot summer in 2013. And people were still picking their grapes in the middle of November in 2013. But even if that's not very good for still wines, for sparkling wines, because you want acidity, because you want that crackle in the wine, picking very late and not particularly ripe can make some beautiful sparkling wines, so long as you give them time. And this one's had 7 years, and it's now softening at the edges. It tastes like
it is
lemony, but it tastes gentle as well.
And do you know if do Nyetimber make a vintage wine every year, or in the kind of lesser years do they go for a non-vintage?
Well, they make lots and lots of non-vintage now. Lesser year, in 2012, they didn't make any wine at all. They just looked at their vines and they said, the grapes are simply, there aren't many of them. And it was the smallest vintage this century for English wine. And they're not very good, so we're not going to make any wine of them. And I must admit,
brave decision. Yeah.
It's brave or it's smart.
Charlie, the grapes in 2012 were as hard as bullets, and they weren't much good for a tremendous amount of anything, really.
So Nyetimber could have just quietly not made any wine, but they made a big thing about it. Some of the English wine growers weren't very pleased because they did make some 2012, and of course it got hammered by the PR that Nyetimber got for saying ours aren't good enough. Are yours?
We'd have to check, but I think that that was Cliff Richard's Sunday. That year at Wimbledon, so it was. Do you remember when he got up and sang on the Sunday because they never had tennis on the Sunday, but it'd been so wet. So okay, well I
think that's lovely. I think that's a really
I love that. Yeah.
Just a quick recap on 2012. I actually I was a little bit annoyed with Nyetimber that year because I actually made an award-winning wine from Saval Blanc. From 2012, it started off at 20 TA and was hard as bullets, but actually ended up with something quite drinkable. And I was very proud of kind of manipulating, if that's the right word, but turning this kind of bit of a beast into something a little bit beautiful at the end. So when Nyetimber says 2012 was rubbish, I was a little bit kind of, well, it can be quite good.
Well, there were well over 1 million bottles made in 2012, and I've had some perfectly nice wine. It's a case of whether you got you got a flowering which gave you any fruit, whether you got any too much rot or mildew. It's a terrible summer. But where were your grapes growing for your Saval?
Well, this was all the way up in Derbyshire, so clearly.
Oh. So exactly where I'd have thought. I mean, if I was going to go in a bad year for some nice fruit, I'd go straight to Derbyshire.
Well, I think this is the interesting thing about your book, Oz, and in a great year, I think that the south of England, one would hope, would do better than the north of England. But in a mixed year, it's a bit of a free for all. And if you've got a warm site, then you can almost achieve anything. And that was a sort of year where I think people from, a vineyard from Derbyshire or a vineyard from Yorkshire could almost kind of put something in the eye of the vineyard from the south of England, in the same way that Nyetimber obviously famously have done with the guys from Champagne. So it's it's interesting.
It's one of the reasons Essex works so well, because of course Essex doesn't get the same weather systems as most of the rest of England, and it regularly produces really nice fruit. I'm sure.
Well, of course, now before we introduce Brad and Sherry, let's try the Cuvée Sherry, which is a demi-sec. There you are.
You're opening your bottles extremely well this evening, Charlie.
Well, yes, yeah.
Obviously, it's your new fitness.
All about sobriety,
Yeah.
So
You've
I'm
got
going to pour myself a slightly smaller glass of this, because I've never been a great fan of demi-sec. I never quite know what to eat with it, really. What would you enjoy to eat with demi-sec, or would you just drink it on its own as a digestif?
Well, it's really a problem, isn't it? Because actually the kind of things you think you might eat with it are things like pears and apples.
Yeah.
Possibly white peaches or something like that. But it's got a certain amount of sweetness in it. By the way, when this was first released, it's been being made for several years now. I thought it was almost too innocuous. I think that they've tinkered with the blend and probably the sugar in it and maybe given it more age, because the wine I think's got a lot more flavor now than it had when it was first on the market a few years ago. But I only presume that they make it because there are some people who find dry wine a bit too dry. At the last few years, there's been a fashion for making wine with absolutely no sweetness in at all, which I think is probably overdoing it a bit. But I don't know. It's possible that Cherie just thought, I need a new challenge.
I had a great tip from a local cheesemaker who was producing Stilton, and they were saying that sweeter wines, and actually they were pairing Stiltons and those kind of cheeses with sparkling rosé, and actually I think this would be a sort of wine which would go fantastically well with cheese, as long as that sweetness would.
I completely concur with that, Kieron, because I'm a great believer in yin and yang, sweet and sour.
Yeah.
I think it's just such a shame. Some people would automatically drink this with, a pudding.
Wouldn't work.
But I think with a Stilton or perhaps a stinky Italian, that'd be a great yin and yang.
Keep it British, Cropwell Bishop or a stinking Bishop, or
because I'm thinking more of something like a Lancashire or a Cheshire. Completely different cheese idea.
But I think it's an interesting one that people assume sparkling wine needs to be consumed or drunk as a pre-dinner thing, and actually this is something that would be great in that sort of.
Yeah. Well, I know that Brad and Cherie are champing at the bit to tell us all about Nyetimber. So, Kieron, I'm going to turn to you now, and if you could just introduce our friends from Nyetimber, and we'll look forward to hearing from them.
Oh, thank you very much, Charlie. It's an absolute pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce Brad and Cherie. I think as Oz is your intro suggested, as a young winemaker looking into Nyetimber was the equivalent of, I think, people almost looking at Excalibur for its quality and its standard and what it achieved in the world. So it's personally a very exciting moment to finally meet Brad and Cherie.
Well, thank you.
I'm delighted to see you two as well, because you made such a difference to English wine while you've been here. And of course, when they open their mouths, you will both realize they're not English. So tell us, Cherie, you're from Vancouver Island.
Spoiled our surprise, Oz. Indeed. I was born and raised in Victoria, so Vancouver Island, west coast of Canada.
What about Brad?
I grew up in Ontario, around Toronto, the Toronto area. Never in Toronto, but that's
two seriously Canadian people, in other words. So what was it that brought you to England? Did you see a challenge that you wanted, or were you sort of cherry picked from another part of the world by Eric Hiersma, the owner of Nyetimber?
Well, it was very much, and I like to call it an aligning of interests. And how that came to be is, despite the Canadian accent for myself, I was actually, as long as I can remember, I've always had two passports. The second being a British passport, because my father was born in England and emigrated to Canada many years ago. So he actually brought me a bottle of Nyetimber many years ago now, when it was had barely hit the market really, and we tried it in Canada at one point and said, hey, there's some really exciting potential here. And about 5 years after this tasting, we were looking at various wine opportunities, winemaking opportunities, and out for a walk one night, Brad said to me, let's just apply to dream jobs, things that we think we're never gonna actually go and do. And the first thing that came into my head was sparkling wine in England. And I wrote info@nyetimber.com and said, hey, we're two young winemakers. We're looking for, to know, is there enough of an opportunity to warrant moving to England and looking for work? And the response I got back was, actually, our owner and CEO, Eric Harima, has been searching for 6 months, and he is actually looking for 2 qualified winemakers. So please send your CV. And hence my CV and Brad's CV landed in Mr. Harima's lap, and we found in each other what we were looking for. We found in Eric the commitment, the vision, the no barriers on what one needs to do to make great wine. And I guess he found in us the passion and desire that he was looking for in a winemaker. So here we are, over 13 years later.
Whoa, that was 2007, was it?
2007, and
Eric,
it was less than 3 weeks from that first email until our first day at work. So if you asked me on January 31st, 2007, name 20 countries where you may end up making wine, I would have gone through all 20 and not mentioned England. Yeah. And 3 weeks later, I was working at Nyetimber.
And did you guys come straight in as the kind of senior winemakers and the people in charge? And when you arrived, what faced you? Was it what you expected? Obviously, looking into Nyetimber, one has a view of this super polished business and fantastic wines that Oz has spoken about. But when you arrived, was it the case, or was it a little bit kind of rough around the edges? How did it start?
I mean, some things were as we expected, and some things weren't. I suppose that's rather normal. But this is going back 13 years ago, and the industry, and I would argue Nyetimber, have changed a lot in that time. But when we started, the industry as a whole, and I think it's fair to include Nyetimber in this generalization I'm going to make, was sort of, we say, the way we describe it is that it was kind of at a cottage industry level, rather than as serious producers looking to really take the industry somewhere on a world stage. And what comes with that is inconsistency. So what we faced on walking into Nyetimber in those days was inconsistency. Some things were really good. Some of the foundations were great. They made some good decisions on site and soil. There were other things that needed work. And like anybody who is striving perfection, you'll always hear that thing, you need a lot of work to get to 80% and the same amount of work again to go from 80 to 100%. And that's just very true. So there were lots of areas that we could see, okay, we need to improve on that practice. We need to take more care here. And to answer your question directly, there was no one with long-term employment in the winemaking position at that point. There was a person who was filling the role in an interim way, but she had always planned to go off and enter wine studies. Belinda Kemp, actually, if you happen to know her, she's now an amazing scientist doing some really great work in wine. So
in Canada? ironically.
In Canada,
Ontario.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was always her intention. She had the plan to stay, so it was known from when she started helping Eric that she wasn't gonna stay long.
Bye.
That was quite exciting then, because you were coming to the winery, which, as you say, out of a very small field, was already the top winery because of sort of what it had done a few years before, rather than what it was doing at that moment. And I can absolutely imagine Eric, the new owner, saying, "We just have to get a totally visionary, determined team here." I'm not sure whether he just realized he was going to have a couple of Canadians turning up on his doorstep.
Probably not.
Canadian. I am delighted the Canadians are here.
I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Brett.
I was just. What I think, one of the things that we share with Eric is tasting through the wines. We could see the really exciting bits, and the things that weren't quite right. We knew, okay, we'll get to that soon, but tasting through, going into the library and tasting the wines all the way back to 92, we all got that same feeling, like there is something really special here. And just based on where these vines are planted, they want to produce some special wines. But I think, putting myself in Eric's shoes back in 2007 when he appointed us, I think it's true that some people would say, it's a crazy risk to go with, two young Canadian winemakers. But I think, I've never actually directly asked him this, but I think what he liked maybe is coming with an open mind. So we're not coming across from Champagne. He'd spoken to some Champenois actually about the job and never found the right fit, but we're not coming across from Champagne with our book of recipes and this is what we're going to apply because it works over there. It's, let's put our boots on the ground and look around and see, what do we need? What's interesting here? What can we tease out and what can we make that's special and also distinctive?
Yeah, because even in 2020, that's still happening. People are turning up from Champagne, having been expensively hired, and they're just saying, "Here's the book of how you do it. Here's how you plant the vineyards. Here's the clones and the rootstocks you use. Here's the style that I make the wine." And you say, "But hang on, this isn't Champagne," and they're not interested. They're saying, "This is how you do it." So I can absolutely see Eric's view there as well. And since the style of wine that you now make at Nyetimber is very different from the style of those early Nyetimbers, can you give us some insight into your vision of flavor, particularly for the classic cuvee?
Sure. I mean, I think right from the beginning, one of the things that was really exciting to Brad and I about Eric's vision was only using fruit from vineyards that we own. And that might sound so simple, but if you think about Champagne as, we can't avoid the comparison and the benchmark, that's not that common. If the Grand Marques that everybody knows, there's a lot of purchased fruit. And with our love of wine generally, I always find it really exciting to consider the terroir and the character from the vineyard. And so when you're working with vineyards that over the years you get to know intimately, I just love that. I mean, that's the joy of winemaking in so many respects. So right from the start, Brad and I's feeling for Nyetimber was, we are so blessed by this. Why would we try to do anything other than respect those characters and those flavors? And you can make some amazing wines using strong techniques, maybe oak barrel ferment, for example. But we wanted to stay away with that and stick to the neutrality to allow vineyard characters to come through. Alongside that, especially as we got to know Nyetimber and our vineyards over the years, we just loved how the English character expressed in the grapes and how you could see in my music. I'm trained in classical piano, so I always draw a music analogy. And I feel like the tones of flavors that we get are more, there's always a bit of everything, but more weighted towards the soprano end. And so with something like the classic cuvee, we want that. We want some of those high-toned, crisp, bright apple, citrus elements in there. And then the way we balance that to create the overall picture is with the reserve wine and the lees aging, just so that it's not unidimensional. Also is great this dry, you kind of need to bring in some of those other elements. So I hope my music analogy makes sense, but it's how I think of it in my mind.
You mentioned reserve wines there. Now,
Yes.
I remember in your early days when we used to chat, I think it was the 2009 vintage when you suddenly said, now I can get a reserve program going. Is that?
Yeah, it's very true. You know, when we talked about when we joined Nyetimber, there were two products. There was the Classic Cuvée and the Blanc de Blanc. They were both made as a vintage dated product, and pretty much every year. The character that was being strived for in the Classic Cuvée as a vintage product was one of a sort of, shall we say, a house style. And the expectation from the market was also the same. Yet that is, you know, our climate is variable. You're not going to achieve that in vintage dated products. That's really hard to do. So right from the beginning, we started talking about what we wanted from each of the wines in the portfolio, and Classic Cuvée, we needed reserve wines to be able to truly bring that sense of consistency and also interesting flavors into the wine. So yeah, we had to take a few years and keep wine back and patiently wait while we had enough reserve wine to be able to create the first multi-vintage, as we call it, blend.
And
you keep your wine in stainless steel or some of it in wood?
No, stainless steel tanks.
Stainless steel tank on fine lees.
And sorry, just a question. Obviously, I would imagine as young winemakers arriving, having penned the perfect email, and having nailed your interview. You need to write a book about interview techniques, by the way. But having nailed that interview, to then arrive at, you know, not maybe in global terms a huge business, but for the UK, the most important business. Did you feel any pressure? And, you know, in regards to the wine and the evolution, you know, Oz's question, did you ever think, well, maybe we should introduce a moat? Should we do something different? Or, you know, giving a sporting analogy, you're taking on something that is fantastic, you know, that people love already. It's already winning, and you've got to keep going. How did you feel about that? Was that those first few years? Were you under pressure? Did you feel it, or was it just fun?
I think you know, on the first point on the email and the interview, I think just don't quite realize the enormity of what you're going for, and then you can be very casual about it, and it all works out well. But when we arrived, I think our view is here's a place that has a tremendous reputation that you know, we moved halfway around the world to be involved in. So the last thing we want to do is just you know, we know best, and let's turn over everything that's been successful in the past. But what was really important for us was to try and work on, you know, the Nyetimber had some tremendous highs, but also some lows. Looking back in the, you know, in the wine library, what we wanted to do is not have those lows. Try to just hit the highs as often as we could, and also owning all of our own vineyards. The way for us to make the most distinctive wines, or let's say not even distinctive, but inimitable wines, is to have the vineyard show through in the wines. If we're letting our vineyards shine in the wines, there's no way that somebody else can make a wine like us unless they come along and, you know, and steal our grapes or buy the vineyard from us. So we've always had this approach that you know, Sherry said in other discussions about having an inert approach to winemaking, and that's not to say, you know, blanketing everything with argon and nitrogen. That means that our mark on the wines should be relatively, you know, one degree of separation, because put vines in the right place, look after them well, and you'll make something special. And that's how we've ended up. We haven't talked about our vineyard locations yet, but we've got 11 vineyards now, spread as far west as Hampshire, the other side of Winchester, and then almost to the east coast of Kent. And that's because we're looking for little pockets of land that have soil shelter aspect. And when you put vines in those places, then our job is about making sure that shows up in the glass, not about coming up with some potion or concoction or series of actions that will give a taste or a style to the wine.
I think
But it's
you'll find also that Brad and I are, I mean, most people consider us to be quite humble people, and we feel that that matters from a winemaker's point of view. So we didn't want to come in and go, oh, we're going to put oak all over everything and change the whole way everything is working, put our mark on it. It's like, well, no. A winemaker has a bit of humility in what they do, or we think they should anyway, by slightly getting out of the way and not trying to be my wine, if you see what I mean.
But you must have decided to evolve your style, because
Sure. I mean,
when you started,
when you, I mean, to explain the answer fully, you have to understand a little bit the history of Nyetimber. From you know, one of the most major changes that we made was changing the policy at that time that we joined about malolactic fermentation. So, for example, to the early days of Nyetimber. So I'm going to generalize here, but the first vintage was made in 1992, and up to and including, by and large, the 1998 vintage wines, they were all made with full malolactic fermentation. Then there was a decision made that Nyetimber should stop doing that and do no malolactic fermentation starting in 1999 and on. And that rule, as it were, was there when we joined in 2007. And our view in that year, what we said to each other was, it's kind of an interesting rule. England's possibly the coolest climate in the winemaking world, and every region has an Achilles heel. So we may have to look at this, because there is such a thing as too much acidity, even in sparkling wine. But, you know, let's see the first vintage, let's see how it goes. And in 2007, that's what we did. We made it without malolactic fermentation. 2008 came along, and we saw some of the highest acids that harvest that we've ever seen. And we threw the rule out the window, because balance matters more than a rule. And that's an example of where we weren't looking to put our mark on the wine. We were looking to ensure there was balance in it. And so we made a decision, no, this rule is silly to be dogmatic about. We're going to do the malolactic fermentation and create that sense of ease that the malo can bring.
Wines that are thrilling and enjoyable to drink, not just to taste. And acidity sometimes can still catch your attention and be captivating when you've just got a single glass and take a sip and make some notes and then move on. But those wines tend to be ones where the bottle stays about half full on the dining table for quite a long time, because no one's reaching back for a refill necessarily.
I was also thinking about you.
Examples like that? Oh, sorry, Ron. So I was just going to say there are other examples like that, where there were certain practices that we've changed that have made an impact on the style. But it's not in the manner of us saying, oh, let's put a hammer on this. It's just this sort of a different way of achieving the style that we now have.
And that first, you were in the middle of that first decade, when there were quite a few cool vintages, when you were coming after 2003, obviously, which was warm. But I wondered whether the way that you've chosen your new vintages, your new vineyards, has been looking forwards to what climate change may bring, given that your green sand vineyards in Sussex are on the whole on the warm side, and some of your chalk vineyards in Hampshire and Kent are still on the cool side. And of course, chalk is that alkaline soil, which is going to give you a sharper, more focused fruit as well. Is that a fair comment?
I think that it's the relative point is true between those two, but I still think even the green sand sites, we're still on at the entry of a window where we're talking about optimal for sparkling wine. So there is still a lot of room, even on the warmest sites, for upward drift temperature wise. Not that we're encouraging that. That brings globally a lot of issues. But
I think we probably, arguably, the driver on the sites we've chosen has been more about getting enough diversity in the flavors that we're working with, rather than driven directly or exclusively by potential global warming, if that makes sense. It was, the impetus was more, we want some of those amazing flavors you can get from chalk, including that sense of the chalk that you get on the palate, to bring that into our playbook.
Now, what in that 2013 Blanc de Blanc,
Yes.
I remember tasting the base wines with you in 2014, and the difference between the Hampshire chalks, I think those were, weren't they, and the Sussex green sands was absolutely dramatic.
Absolutely.
Is this a blend of Sussex and Hampshire? And if so, is it your first one?
In all true respects, yes. There was some Hampshire fruit in 2011, but it was really tiny. So too small to really be of real note. And in 2012, we didn't make any wine based on that particular summer. So this 2013 is indeed the first real blend of Sussex and Hampshire fruit into the Blanc de Blanc. It's roughly 70% Sussex and 30% Hampshire. So a significant enough portion from the Hampshire sites that we can feel that impact in the wine. And yeah, it was just really, I remember that tasting too. And to this day, it's still fun and exciting to try these different vineyards and see the difference.
I think you guys now have, you've been on the scene for over a decade, and so much has changed. I mean, I was at university at Plumpton with Mark Driver, and Rathfinny has arrived, and Ridgeview has grown, and all around you we've got MDCV, and we've got lots of people entering the industry. How do you see where the industry is going in the short term, next 5-10 years, really? And I guess long term, moving forward, are you dramatic about what you think will change, or what's the future for Nyetimber?
I think there's so much. I mean, the industry has grown, not just in size but also in maturity in the time that we've been here. So the professionalism, the way that everyone presents themselves, the quality of the wines. I mean, every year at the English wine trade tasting in London, it didn't happen this year, but up till last year, the quality across the board just keeps climbing and climbing. So no reason why that trend can't continue. But there's been some discussions about the amount of vines and the amount of wine coming versus sales, etc. And I think it's important to keep an eye on that. But also, there's so much untapped potential as well. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's going to be above 80, probably even above 90% of all the British produced wines are sold in this country. So taking bottles overseas it represents enormous potential, and I think that's the next step that everyone is taking a serious look at. Everyone that's serious about growth is taking a look at. It's not going to be as easy. Not that it was easy. Geez, that's overstating. Not that it was easy here, but of course, going overseas, you lose all the local support. So it's a harder sell over there, whether you go east or west, because people don't quite know what to think of English wine until they get a chance to taste it.
And I'm kind of excited about, this. I hope this doesn't sound snobby, but back in 2007, when people would say, "Oh, can you recommend some other English wines?" The list was pretty small on what you could honestly say, "Oh yeah, go try this or that or the other." And what I love, what's starting to emerge, and I think will continue to emerge, is we've got some great other quality wines out there, and ever more, I think those houses are starting to develop their own identity and who they are and what their wine style is and what their character is. Rather than just everybody's kind of doing the same thing and it's all a bit of much of a muchness. And I mean, I'm a wine lover. I love that. That's great.
You enjoy the rivalry, do you? Because there is now, there never was rivalry. When you arrived in England, I suppose you might say there's Nyetimber and Ridgeview, and there were some good wines being made by Chapel Down and Denbies, but not normally at the same kind of level.
More consistency.
Now, not only do those two big guys make outstanding wine, Ridgeview's making better wine than it's ever made, but there's another 10, 15, 20, and each year another few. Is that exciting for you, or does it?
Love it.
Very exciting. I mean, we were thinking of the, how the wineries saw themselves back then. It was all sort of single file, wanting to, who was the best and who was second and who was third. And now, as Sherry was saying with house styles, it isn't got to be that, there's one best English sparkling wine, but grab a bottle of Nyetimber so-and-so for this occasion, go to, Black Chalk or Ridgeview or Chapel Down if you want this wine for that occasion. And that's so important. There's no one singular champagne that everybody loves the most. There needn't be one singular, English sparkling wine for every occasion. As much as I would love Nyetimber to fill as many glasses as possible, to grow and to be perceived more sophisticated as a industry, we need those identities.
Well, Brad and Cherie, that's I think an absolutely perfect way to finish your, great presentation of your wines, because what you've clearly been saying, it's a great industry. You are masters of what you do. There are people have different styles. Certainly, when we get to 3:00 on Christmas Day, which is a difficult time, when I'm usually raising a glass to the monarch for what I think will be a very interesting speech, I will be definitely having a glass of Cuvée Chérie, because I think that's just a perfect glass, and maybe some the Blanc de Blanc on Boxing Day. But thank you very much for joining us, as always. Kieron, I'm afraid the next time we meet, you're being replaced. You're being replaced by David Gower, England cricketer, who's going to join Oz and myself with a little chat about his world of wine and how he's enjoyed wine around the world whilst being England cricket captain and all sorts of other things. So, Brad, Cherie, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Do go on the website. We're looking forward to getting you on the website so we can come and buy your wine.
Fabulous.
Okay, so what I can say now is, just to finish off, please, all of you remain forever thirsty.
Indeed. And happy and healthy upcoming holiday season to you all.
And to you.
Forever thirsty.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Cherie.
Hi, it's Charlie the Wine. Now, if you've enjoyed this video and would like to learn a little bit more about the services that me, Charlie the Wine, can offer, why not head over to my website, www.foreverthirsty.co.uk, and just see all the wonderful offerings I can help with. But please remain forever thirsty.